All right, so before we begin, I would just like to state for the record that today is July 12th, 2022, and my name is Ben Bauman. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, speaking via phone with Dale Grubb, who is located in Covington, Indiana, and we are doing an interview for the Indiana Legislative Oral History Initiative. So just starting off, when and where were you born?
I was born in Danville, Illinois, which is just right across the state line, in 1949.
Okay, and what were your parents' names?
My father's name is William. My mother's name was Levita Bernice. My father's still alive. He's 100 years old. My mother passed away about a year ago, and they had been married 79 years. I also have two younger sisters.
Interesting, okay. So when did your family first get to Indiana?
Oh my, I've done extensive genealogy things in this. You can go back the end of the last century. There was some Grubbs who migrated out of Virginia.
Okay.
And came up here.
Yeah, okay, that's cool.
I can actually trace my family. I'm a member of the Sons of American Revolution to a family by the name of Fleming, which came from Scotland.
Oh, wow.
In the 1700s.
That's really cool.
The current place where my dad still lives, the farm, they bought in 1932. Actually, they moved there in 1932 and bought it in 1934 out of bankruptcy from the Lafayette Life Company. And my father's not strayed from there for his entire life.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay. Let's see, what were your parents' occupations?
My father has farmed his entire life, still does. He was out there on a tractor a moment ago, and I tried to help him a little bit because he's so frail, but he gets activated when you try to help him. My mother basically canned all kinds of vegetables and fruits in the summertime. We also had chickens, and she sold eggs so that she could buy the furniture for my bedroom, I remember.
That's interesting, okay. Do you have any siblings?
I have two younger sisters, Marilyn, who's 2 years younger than I, and Jean, who's the baby of the family, and she's 5 years younger. I am my second marriage to Phyllis, and we have a blended family of 6 boys and 1 girl.
Oh, wow, okay. So how would you describe your childhood?
Work.
Yeah.
Just the way things are. When other boys were sleeping in on Saturday mornings, my mom would have me up to help Dad. So it's always been, something to do or something needs fixed. And also when I was in high school, I worked at the gas station once I became 15 years old, 2 nights a week and all day Saturday and every other Sunday. So, and then during college, I came home and worked for the city electric department for a couple of 3 years during that summer break.
Okay. Who would you say was the most influential people in your childhood?
Most influential people? My mother.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think I can go much. She's just heads above everybody else in what she expected and how she handled herself and the upbringing that she provided for us.
Okay. What did you know about your family's political beliefs growing up?
Not much, except to tease Grandpa once in a while that, go out there. My grandfather lived in town when Dad and Mom moved to the farm, and on occasion, I remember my mother said, go out there and wave your arm trying to flag your grandpa down, tell him you're a Republican. That's about as political as it got, Al. I had no idea what that meant.
That's funny. Okay. What schools did you attend growing up?
Attended Covington High School, graduated in 1967. Then Purdue University, graduated in 71 with a degree in Ag Econ. And right after that period, of course, we were right in the middle of Vietnam. I was in the United States Air Force Reserve at Grissom from 71 to 79, and they trained me, listen to this, a dirt farmer, as an operating room tech.
Oh, wow, okay. Jeez. Now, how did you view the state of Indiana, growing up and going to college? Did you kind of understand its sense of place in the country, or?
Oh, you just, if it's the only thing you know, it's what you think it ought to be. So
Yeah.
it wasn't really anything to, to expand my world. And then now later in life, I love to travel, and I've been all the way from Hawaii to Bosnia.
Oh, wow.
So, and Russia and et cetera places. So I developed a strong desire to travel after I got older. But when we were young, I remember one trip in 1958. Dad had bought a brand new Mercury Marquis, and we took a trip to Colorado, and that was the longest trip I ever seen and remember in my life. But basically, I think we made one trip back to Virginia to visit some relatives, but that's a distant memory to me.
Yeah, okay. Were you involved in any extracurricular activities in college?
In college, I think the only thing I would bring up is Purdue holds what's called Mock P, which is a mock political convention. And things were pretty excitable during those days as far as, the world dynamics with Vietnam. One of the things that was certainly underlining all the time was that I was 18, I couldn't vote, couldn't drink a beer, but I could get killed.
Yeah.
And that became a pretty strong influence, I think, on many people in my age bracket.
Sure, I bet, yeah. So, did you start to develop like a political identity then in college?
Well, that kind of struck me as wrong. So, to the degree you're able to in a situation like this, the local county Democrat chairman had a precinct committeeman who was over 80 retiring, and he asked me if I'd be interested. So, I didn't think I had anything to lose, so I tackled it, and that was the first election I had ever won was for precinct committeeman in 1968, I believe it was.
Yeah, okay. So,
a pretty non-political, area to be from.
Sure. So, describe then your employment history after you got out of the military.
Oh gosh, I worked for a bank in northern Indiana for about 3 years as a assistant branch manager for a bank out of Michigan City. And about 1974 or 5, farming had come into preview as a possibility, and Dad was getting a little older. So in 1974, I moved back to the farm and have been there and farming it ever since. I also started after, must have been about 78 or 9, a commodity brokerage business where I brokered the farmer's grain and had futures market capabilities for trading, and stayed with that scenario of farming some and running the business up until when I sold it after I got elected, because the time constraints got too great.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, I forgot, when I was a kid, the other thing we did for money, I was a 10-year 4-H member and raised hogs and chickens for showing at the 4-H fair, and that teaches you a little capitalism pretty quickly.
Yeah. Interesting, okay. When did you get married?
Phyllis and I have been married. My first marriage lasted 19 years when I had 3 sons.
Okay.
My marriage is to Phyllis, and we've been married, I got to think about this, 27 years.
Okay. Cool, all right.
She's retired VA hospital in Danville as a purchasing agent.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So when did you decide that you wanted to get more seriously involved in politics and think about running for office?
Well, a lot of things had happened. As I mentioned, at Purdue, they held Mock P, and I was a member of the Massachusetts delegation, which nominated Bobby Kennedy. And they had a history at that time of never having lost whoever they decided the nominee would be. Well, as things played out, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, and then earlier in 1960, vividly remember when I was in math class of getting the news that John Kennedy had been shot.
Yeah.
So those things were just all kind of percolating underneath the surface, and then in 1988, I found that the incumbent Democrat had decided to retire. And as most people know, it's much easier to run for an open seat than it is an occupied incumbent seat. So I thought, you don't get many chances in life, and what the hell? So I took a chance and basically drove the wheels off of the car, as the district was almost 100 miles long, running from Fowler clear down into West Terre Haute. So it took a lot of time and effort to get people to know you. And I did. What started out was with a little Christmas ornament that looked like a donkey that said "Win the State" in '88, and went to every precinct committeeman. I think there was 55 of them in the district. Gave him one of those as an introduction, and got to talk to him that way. This was all during the Evan Bayh era, and things were. And of course, Shirkyville was in the district that I represented, so it just kind of all come together at once. I had 3 or 4 opponents in the first primary, of which I won, and then went on to win the general election that year, 60-40.
Okay, wow. Now, did you have a particular campaign strategy when you were running for office?
No, not really. I just, you're naive to some degree, I guess. It's about what you're getting into. I certainly was. But you just have a desire to see things changed for what you consider are not correct, like the voting age at 18 and things like that. So I don't know, it just kind of fell into place, and I decided to give it a shot, and 24 years later I finished.
Yeah, okay. Did you do any door-to-door campaigning?
Oh my God, yes. I got nephews and my boys. We did door hangers. And in that first campaign, we literally went everywhere that we could find a voter. And there's some pretty rural parts of the district. So, we did as much hand-to-hand combat as you could possibly imagine.
I bet. Did you have any interesting kind of experiences meeting people that were...
Well, you did. You always learn something from people. And some of the people I ran into had run for office, and been in and just offered good advice, as don't be stupid. That's the main thing. Don't open your mouth and remove all doubt about being a fool. So sometimes what you learn is that people want you to listen to them. They're not so interested in all the things you're going to tell them you think you can do.
Right.
But it's important that you let them talk.
Yeah, sure. Who was your main opponent when you ran for office?
In the general election, it was a guy by the name of Jack Goff, who was Joe Harrison's nephew.
Okay.
I remember going to Attica. That's where he was from. And on election day, I got donuts at 5 o'clock when the shift changed at Harrison Steel, and stood there and handed out donuts to people. I remember one guy said, "If you want it that bad, I'm voting for you." So,
that's hilarious.
You show them the work ethic is what they want to see.
Yeah. That's interesting. It's how different were your politics compared to your opponent?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that very well. I would imagine that his philosophies were a straight party line almost, and I think I'm probably a little bit more of a moderate personality. Rex Early once said it's a thin pancake that doesn't have two sides, and I thought that was pretty insightful, and over time you learn, after I was in and served a while, that some of the ideas you hold are not always right, and you need to be flexible enough to change or make an adjustment when you see that you've erred or you've learned something new that changes your mind.
Yeah, sure.
Unfortunately, we're in a situation today, particularly nationally, where it just seems like it's straight party line votes all the time, and I don't know why people feel just because someone has an opposing view that they're your enemy.
Yeah.
Because that's not the way it should be, and I hope to pray to God that it does slip back to where, we get a more civil situation. The problem is gerrymandering, and that's particularly evident right now with what's going on in D.C. with some of these things. It's wrong, okay, and trust me, I know, because I helped draw a couple of my own maps. I wanted to make sure
Sure.
I knew where the votes were more than likely to vote for me. So it's only natural. Self-preservation is the most basic instinct one has. But it's not right. It leads to minority rule, which leads to unrest. And unless the U.S. Congress, and I don't think they're inclined to at the moment or couldn't get the votes to do away with gerrymandering, it's just not right.
Yeah, it's definitely some concerning things going on that seem to have no end in sight at the moment, I guess. So, pretty toxic time in politics.
It is. I don't know why anybody would want to participate in that kind of a situation. It makes me sick sometimes to see how people treat each other.
Sure, I bet. Yeah.
I had a wonderful career. If you want me to just expand a little bit
Sure.
on some key legislation that I dealt with, one of them I'm most proud of was the expansion of the organ donor programs in Indiana. And on your driver's license, you get a little dot there. It says you're willing to be a donor. I thought that was important with as many grandkids as I had.
Yeah.
The railroads abandoned property along my father's farm and everyone else, and there was a scam going on by a company who was actually selling quitclaim deeds to farmers, which means they simply were transferring whatever interests they had. Well, some of them were rental agreements and some of them were outright sales, so we cleaned that statute up so that there wasn't much, no more rip-offs going on. I worked extensively, though not with a lot of success, on the renewable energy items. Also, one thing that I'm most proud of is the case review board for the Indiana High School Athletic Association. In times previous to this board being formed that I passed, people would have to go to court if they disliked the ruling made by the ISHAA, and that came about as a result from a kid by the name of Billy Hout. Billy Hout was from South Vermilion and a good soccer player, and during the junior to senior year, he signed up to the Indiana National Guard, went to basic training, and as usual, they don't get their flights quite full until they wait for people to show up to come in. Well, Billy did all that and put him 2 weeks late coming back to Indiana to high school, and they wouldn't let him play in organized matches. And the reasoning was they had a rule that said you had to practice 10 organized practices before you could compete. And the rule makes some sense from the standpoint that you don't want people out of condition out there, getting hurt. Well, Billy's kind of an exception. Hell, he just got out of basic training. I've been through basic training. I know he was in better shape than most anyone else. They were totally inflexible on it. And if they wanted to challenge it, or South Vermilion wanted to challenge it, they would have had to go into court and spend a lot of money. We set the review panel up, and I think it's been pretty calm since then, and I think it's helped a lot of students. That's one of them I consider pretty important. I can tell you an interesting, the first one I ever passed had to do with mollusk. I'm right here on the Wabash River, and there was a lot on that river when I was growing up, and the mussels that I'm talking about, they're quite an interesting life cycle. The gametes from a mussel attach to a specific fish fin for nourishment and then drop off at a certain place. Well, the price of mussel shells got so high that they were scuba diving for them. And I passed legislation that put a stop to the harvesting for a while.
Wow.
So that they could, reinvigorate the population. Just something crazy. But one of those things you remember.
Yeah, that's all very interesting. Okay. Yeah, it's a good...
Another moment that I'll never forget was I stayed at the Columbia Club most of the time. It was close and handy and safe. And one night, we were sitting around talking and just having a little drink or something, and I get a call from Chris Bailey, who was the head of the Indiana State Department of Health. And I was shocked to get a phone call. It just surprised me that he would be calling me, at the club. And his first words were, "We've got a death angel situation," which I just kind of rocked me back, to which my question was, well, what's happened? 1 or 2 people died? And I said, well, how many? And he indicated, we don't know, but we think over 20. This was the case of Vermilion Hospital where Orville Lynn Majors, who's now, I think, deceased or died, I think, while in prison. took it upon himself to terminate people's lives. And boy, I'll never forget that moment as long as I live.
Wow. Yikes. Yeah. Geez. Okay. Yeah.
Am I taking you on a tangent? You don't want to go on here?
No, you're totally fine. You're totally fine. Yeah. No, I mean, the more information that you have to share, the better, since it's, oral history. So it's about getting, everything that you remember. So
I'm happy to do that.
let's see. Thinking back a little bit to your first election, what did you think of the election process? Did it seem pretty straightforward, or was it confusing, or?
No, I think it seemed pretty simple in those days. I mean, you didn't have, of course, near the mechanical voting. It was mainly paper ballot.
Yeah.
And what machines they did have was pretty simple to use. So I did not find it alarming at all. It looked secure to me, and the way it had been done for a long, long time. So I had no problem with that.
Yeah, okay. What was your reaction when you found out that you won the election?
Amazed. I mean, it had been, I started campaigning on Thanksgiving the year earlier, so it had been a long, drawn-out affair, and you're just almost in shock, okay? And I won that election, I think, 60-40, so it wasn't too close, but it set you back, and all of a sudden, now you go, okay, I caught the car, what do I do with it?
Yeah, sure, yeah, I bet. Now, did you change your campaign strategies at all for future elections?
No.
Okay.
Not real. I have some tapes of, commercials and things that I had ran, but other than that, no.
Okay. What were you thinking when you walked into the State House for your first day in office?
I was stricken, would be the best word for it, to think that a kid from Fountain County Farm could actually end up in a position to where you could make a difference sometime. I felt a lot of responsibility. Trying to make sure I didn't do anything to embarrass anybody was number one, and learning the players is number two. In those days, longevity of a member was greater than what it is today, where it's 2 or 4 now. There are a lot of people have been there 20, 30 years, and I had a lot to learn from them. So I just kind of played it by ear and tried to introduce myself to people and talk to them and understand where they were coming from if it was an issue of some contention.
Okay, sure.
Another time was extremely interesting to me was a trip to Bosnia I made with Indiana employers and the Indiana National Guard. And you get a real different perspective on the world when you go to a country like Bosnia, which had been under tremendous pressure with the fighting between Croatia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. I mean, the standard of living was just, so much lower than what we have.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really quite fascinating. If I remember right, Maggie Kerner was with us. And whenever we would go to see something, here's the black SUVs with the M16s at the corners blocking the traffic, so you really get a different perspective. And the big deal there was that there had been a slaughter in 1995 in a little town called Srebrenica.
Right.
And they had, the Serbs had shot, I don't know the exact number, but it was up in the thousands of people. And the graves were young enough that the dirt had not been rained down, pat. It was still chunky.
Yeah.
You really get a different perspective on what's going on in the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Dick Lugar was on the ground there too as he was headed. I want to say this. Where's the Dick Lugars, the Birch Byes, the Bob Gartons, the Lee Hamiltons? My God, those people were statesmen. And Senator Lugar was on the ground when we landed at Eagle Base in Bosnia, and he stopped there on his way to go on to, I think it was Belarus, where he was working on nuclear reduction, trying to get rid of the nuclear weapons or get them down to size. I mean, why do we need 2,600 times the firepower to destroy the entire Earth? And I applauded Lugar. I did a resolution for him long before that trip, congratulating him and thanking him for that. And I asked him who he wanted on there from the Democrat side of the aisle, and his comeback was Barack Obama. So that's just a little sidebar.
Yeah. So how did you learn the ins and outs of politics in Indiana?
I think watching people like I just mentioned, Dick Lugar, Birch Bayh, Bob Garden, Lee Hamilton, watching those people and how they conducted and themselves and their demeanor and their rhetoric, I think taught me as much as anything.
Yeah. Sure. How did you know the needs and wants of your constituents?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand, Ben.
How did you know the needs and wants of your constituents?
Well, you do surveys all the time, but, I still stopped at the local coffee shop and had breakfast and before I go to the farm, even when we weren't in session. And they're not bashful about telling you what they think. One of them, I remember a comment one of them made after I got elected caucus chairman in '94. He said, and I'd never heard this before, he said, well, it looks like, he said, it looks like you're licking salt with the big cows. Now, you got to be a farm boy to understand what that means, okay? But it brings you down to earth real quick. It means all the cows, no matter how important they are licking from the same block of salt. And that stuck with me over time.
Sure. Do you remember the first bill that you sponsored or authored?
I think it was the bill on the mollusk, on the mussels in the Wabash River.
Okay. How complex was it to get a bill passed in the General Assembly?
That one was pretty easy. When I got into some of the things later on, like renewable energy, then it gets pretty tough because now you've got major stakeholders who get involved where, there wasn't any of those kind of people about the mussels.
Yeah, makes sense. How often did you work with the other party to get legislation done?
I wanted a Republican, every bill that had my name on top, I wanted a Republican second on that bill.
Okay.
I didn't see any reason not to make everything bipartisan if you could. And, we had some good friendships developed. Bill Friend, who ended up a Republican floor leader, and I did a lot of things together in the agricultural community. One of the most important ones there was the Indiana Grain Indemnity Fund, which if the elevator went broke, the farmer got paid for what he lost.
Yeah, okay. Now, you kind of alluded to this earlier, I suppose, but what was the atmosphere like in the General Assembly between Democrats or Republicans when you served?
It was generally a milder demeanor, but, some people on both sides of the aisle are hard partisan, and you just accept that and you know what it is going in. And then there's or was at least during my time, a pretty large centrist group. And, there were many times a Republican, when we were in majority, would come to me with something they wanted done or needed done and ask if I would help. As long as it was nonpartisan, I'd help them in any way I could. And that pays off, okay, because they'll remember something like that when you got a tough one.
Yeah.
And come back and help support you on something you're trying to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did you witness at all a change in the relations between Democrats and Republicans over the years that you served in the General Assembly, or is it pretty much the same?
No, it's major change. It's more contentious, okay? It's don't go out of your way to help somebody, it appears from the distance. And I don't know, I blame most of the problems on one word, which is greed.
Yeah.
If people were, you had to be willing. I found in order to pass legislation, sometimes you just had to take a small bite at a time. It might take you a year or two to get it completed, but, you do what you can if you're practical about it. I didn't think it made sense to stand there and butt your head against the wall, something that wasn't going to happen. Go around it, go over it, change your demeanor a little bit, or what it is you're wanting to do, and find common ground so that you can pass it.
Yeah, sure. What would you say the difference were between the House and Senate?
Well, the Senate's posture always was much more reserved, and I found working with Bob Darden and several Republican senators to be no problem at all.
Okay.
Just to go ahead of time, okay, I've never carried what I call heavily partisan legislation. It just wasn't me. And I would always go over and talk to Senator Garden and Senator Harrison, who was the state senator from, my district, and tell them what I wanted to do and see whether they had any suggestions to make it better, or if they thought it was dead in the water, or just to pick their brains, and to show them, that I cared enough about what they might have to input into the bill.
Yeah.
That I had a lot of success that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did you ever go against your own party leadership?
Oh, hell yes.
How was that like? What was that like?
Well, it's hell on earth, okay? And that basically happened in my last term when the Republican majority was trying to push through some things of controversy, like minimum wage and prevailing wage, without proper debate. And that caused me to really, when our leader wanted to boycott the floor session to prevent the quorum, well, that had already cost me, I know, and every other member in my caucus $6,000. We had to be deducted from our pay, and we were about to suffer a $1,000 fine. And the thing was, at some point, it made no more sense to keep butting the head on the wall. So I decided to stay on the floor for the quorum call, which led to the request from my caucus for my resignation from that leadership position, of which I did give him the resignation.
Wow.
I understood it, but I felt like, and I still feel like I did what was right. Okay, blockading the system, and I didn't agree with the Republican leader trying to move things so fast that there wasn't adequate debate on it. Okay, so I certainly wasn't on their side of the debate either, but it made no sense to continue to boycott when we were coming up, with $1,000 fines. And most people serving are just your average person with an average income. And, that put severe strain on the family at home and things when you're coming under a $1,000 a day fine.
Yeah.
And I just didn't see where it was going to lead to anything good, and I felt like someone had to do something, and I did it. I went on and pushed my button green, and that led to my request to resign the caucus chairmanship or be fired.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
That was pretty tough. Still, it's kind of tough when sometimes.
So, were you able? How did that affect the rest of your career then, General Assembly? Did you ever recover from that, or were you always kind of looked on as like an untrustworthy person in the party, or?
No, I think I had built up enough respect over time that people understood, and I'm not so sure many of them probably didn't agree with what the action was.
Okay.
To find the courage to do that. Now, I was in my last term, okay? I knew I wasn't running again already, so that didn't come into play for me.
Yeah, I guess a little bit safer situation then in that case.
Maybe might have made it a little easier knowing. I still, had respect from my members. My goodness, when you take somebody who's willing to poke their head out of the foxhole and let them take a shot at you, they respect you for standing for what's right and what you believe to be right.
Yeah.
And there was no downside for the rest of them for me to do that.
Yeah. How often would you say people would do that when you served? Never. So that you were kind of an anomaly then?
The only other thing that I remember that was close to that was in about 1990 or 92, Judge Frank Newkirk from Southern Indiana had switched parties when we were in a 50-50 split.
Oh.
That's something I didn't bring up either. When I first won, we were, for the first time in history, at a 50-50 split. And it took us until Thanksgiving to get the rules settled and be able to conduct business. But you got to have somebody in charge. It ended up with committees with like number of Republicans and Democrats. and nobody was really in charge to act as a governor on the system, and it just was run amok. Now, we changed that statute. We did end up with another 50-50 when I was in, but the statute had been passed earlier that committee chairman and things would depend upon who was elected to the governor's office. So we curtailed some of that problem later on, but that 50-50 split's pretty tough stuff.
Yeah, yes, that's interesting. So, I mean, you served in multiple 50-50 splits in the House, and that was, I guess, 88 and 96?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so do you think that, do you think the process was better in a 50-50 split, or do you think it was just chaos?
No, I think it's more chaos than anything.
Okay. So the General Assembly wasn't more productive or anything like that, you think?
No, what it does, actually, it forces people into opposing camps, Democrat and Republican, because one vote now means the world.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got 50 Republicans voting one way, and you've got one Democrat voting with them, or vice versa. Now the pressure becomes intense on that one person.
Okay. So you didn't like it then, I guess.
No, I mean, it was chaos. We were working until midnight, passing 150 bills on one day. I mean, no could know what was in them.
Yeah. Okay. How influential would you say lobbyists were when you served?
I don't know if I'd like the word influence. The purpose and validity of having lobbyists is education, because as a part-time General Assembly, you all of a sudden faced with 1,000 bills, and it's pretty hard to understand the little nuances in all of them.
Okay.
And the good lobbyists have integrity, and they will tell you straight up, look, you don't want this. I know it's not good for your district. I understand. Or they will explain the nuances of what the bill actually really gets down to doing. So they're an important part of the process, and they got to be very honest, because one slip up or one lie or one policy that come out of their mouth, and nobody would talk to them again.
Yeah, okay. Were there any cases of that where someone just lied to you, or?
I don't remember that occurring, because it is so important to have that credibility.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Do you think, how influential would you say, campaign donations or gifts were to politicians when you served? Do you think it impacted people, or it didn't have any impact?
No, it does. You're cognizant. I mean, it takes money to run campaigns, unfortunately, and I think my first election I spent $40,000, and part of that was my money from my IRA account. But now it's gotten to where, you're looking at $500,000 or maybe $1 million to run for a state senate seat. And the best thing that could happen would be public financing, but there's no support there for it. Unfortunately, I think that people, it just doesn't smell right when you see a campaign contribution of thousands of dollars at the very least, okay? And that's why public financing could improve that scenario, but I don't know of any legislator that's ever been bought by a campaign contribution. And generally, the contributions follow people and who already hold the stance or position that lobbyist is concerned about.
Yeah. Okay. What would you say were the most controversial legislative issues when you served?
Certainly the social issues, rank up and on top. There wasn't a lot, but there was a few of those. Let me think. The prevailing wage, minimum wage, the labor issues, okay, are things that always got pretty partisan, although there would generally be 3 or 4 people from either side of the aisle that would cross over on some of those votes. But they were always pretty intense.
Okay. What do you remember being the most complex piece of legislation that you worked on?
So some of the renewable energy items are pretty complex. And I mean, when you start talking about, okay, who's going to be the winner or loser, what's the long-term ramification to the constituency as far as having electricity there when they flip the switch?
Yeah.
At a reasonable price. Those are pretty complex items that you get into. It doesn't turn out to be quite as simple as what you think it's going to be.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's the one that comes to my mind right off the top. But
now, doing some research and going through some of the newspaper articles when you served, I saw there's a few topics that kept popping up at the time. Do you remember the debates regarding daylight savings time?
Oh my God, yeah. Oh my God, I about forgot it. This is an extremely important issue, and one that I got elected several times just on that issue.
Oh, wow.
Here's the problem. Indiana is in a peculiar position right here on the division between the Central and the Eastern time zone. Geographically, the line on that break should be somewhere over around Richmond, but instead, over time and an agreement that it be the Illinois state line without daylight savings time became where things moved to long before my time as a compromise. Well, as you have seen from those articles, DST came up in a big way again, and nobody wanted to. The Bill's authors would not concede to conceding to it. That said, if we were moved to the Central time zone, daylight savings time ought to be adopted, and I could have supported that position. But here's the problem. Most of the people that live in the district I represented worked across the state line where the jobs are in Danville or somewhere up and down the state line there. Well, by doing what I call double daylight savings time, by being in the wrong time zone to begin with and then adopting it, now what happens is they wouldn't go to work until 9 or 10 in the morning. They wouldn't get off work until 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night and miss their kids' ball games. And you add that onto the confusion of having a doctor's appointment across the state line, which is, like I say, only about 6 miles from where I'm sitting. You always had to ask, is that Indiana time or Illinois time? So I fought that effort for years, years and years, okay? And finally, they got it squeaked through by one vote. I think Bill Grubb was a critical vote on that one when he switched from a no vote to a yes vote. But people felt very strongly about that issue over here.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, what a debate. Yeah, geez. What about the right to work walkout? Do you remember that?
I do very well. There was 25,000 laborers out there in the land between the Indiana government north and south. It was quite contentious, okay? I never felt those debates really got the justice that they deserved because, I mean, look, you could have 1 billion more jobs out here if you want to drop minimum wage down to $1.
Yeah.
Or you could have no jobs if you raise minimum wage to $100. So the question is finding that sweet spot in the middle where you're helping the business create jobs, but you're also providing a decent living for the families who work in those jobs. So those are, I mean, I remember people beating on the glass at the back of the house.
Yeah. Now, do you think that the walkout aspect of that debate, do you think that helped or hurt the Democrats in the long run?
Oh boy. I think it probably hurt.
Okay.
The issues are too complex to get out in a one-bite advertisement or something, and the average person's daily life is so consumed with just trying to put food on the table, they didn't really maybe understand all the nuances of what some of that legislation would do.
Yeah.
So it was very contentious, and one of those moments where you actually were concerned about your safety a little bit in there.
Yeah. Wow. So were you part of the group then that went to Illinois?
Yes.
Yeah.
The first time, yes. Although I never stayed there, okay, because my house is so close to the state line here in Savannah. So I never had to go through that. Like I said, I think that was handled poorly on both parts, all right?
Yeah.
The Republican caucus didn't need to be so heavy-handed time-wise, all right? Let it play out. They had the votes. and don't try to suspend the rules like they tried to do. So, our leader then decided to do the walkout. Well, we did that once, and then it came around the second time here where it was about to happen again, which was when I chose to stay on the floor and vote present for the quorum because I didn't see it was going to get anywhere, and it made no sense to me to keep doing something which wasn't going to work.
Yeah, okay. One of the other things I read was that you were kind of known for being like really bipartisan. Is that something that you agree with and that you kind of like valued?
I wear that with a badge.
Yeah.
It means a lot to me, okay, and it says that I was fair. And in the final analysis, what you want is somebody who's going to be fair in their judgment, okay, and not try to ramrod stuff down, people's throats and come to the compromise. There's generally a compromise, like I said, quoted Marx earlier, it's a thin pancake, doesn't have two sides.
Yeah.
And generally, it seemed to me, I always found some merit in everybody's position, whether I was in agreement with it or not. I did find merit in whatever they had tried to do or what they were trying to help do.
Sure.
Wouldn't we get the best legislation possible if we had more of that and less of the partisanship?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It must be, especially given the role that you served in the General Assembly, being someone that looked to be bipartisan. I guess it can be kind of frustrating to see how things have been increasingly partisan over time in the U.S.
I'm afraid there's a lot of good people who, number one, due to gerrymandering, number two, due to the money and due to the national politics, has taken us down a path that's bad. And I don't know, I guess we've survived damn near 300 years here, so maybe things will straighten themselves back out at some point in time. But show people respect, whether you agree with them or not, okay? There's no reason to be punitive. There's no reason to be heavy-handed. Everybody ought to have a say-so at the table at some point.
Yeah. So when did you leave the Indiana General Assembly?
2012.
And what was your main reason for doing that?
You just get tired. Okay, it's time after. That was 24 years.
Yeah.
And you just get tired after a while of, fighting, changing maps that continue to move. My district baseline was never better than 50-50. And, with everything that was going on in the world, it just felt right to say, there's three ways to leave there. You can die, you can get beat, or you can leave of your own volition. I chose the third one, which I thought was the most acceptable.
Yeah. How would you summarize your time then overall as a state legislator?
I'm very proud of the work ethic I tried to show, the issues that I pushed that I thought would help the average person. And I rest very comfortably, even, with some of the contentious things that happened at the end, knowing I did what I thought was right for my state and my country.
Yeah, that's good. Do you have a favorite story from when you served?
I think I probably relayed most of those favorite stories. I mean,
Sounds good.
It's very intellectually stimulating, okay, to know what the rules are and have something you're trying to do and know how to work it so that you can accomplish that. And so there's some satisfaction in thinking you've really figured out how to do things.
Yeah.
Made a lot of good friends. There's a lot of good people who tried very hard.
What lessons did you learn from your experience?
Patience and give an opposition viewpoint an opportunity to make their case to you. It's just kind of like life, and you do the best you can. You learn as you go, and I'm proud to have served the time I did, and I'm very proud that I was given that opportunity to go from a farm boy in Fountain County, Indiana, to I've met presidents. I've traveled various places that benefited Hoosiers and people in the United States, and I'm very pleased that it turned out the way it did.
Yeah. Okay.
A lot of things impacted us in those days. The Cuban Missile Crisis was coming about. They were pretty. We think we live in some tumultuous times, but we've had some pretty strong deal coming down itself. The trip to Bosnia really, it opened this farm boy's world to no end, to see that people would just murder people, because of their ethnicity.
Yeah.
And it just makes you sick to actually be there and see graves of people who went through that, and think about the sacrifices they made trying to do what they thought was right.
Yeah, definitely. It teaches you a lot about life, I suppose, and
it sure does.
Yeah. Do you have any regrets from your time as a legislator?
Ben, honestly, I don't want to sound uppity or anything, but I don't think I do.
Okay. That's fine.
I'm sure I made some mistakes. Now, you got to be a little bit of value. I don't know how to say it. You've got to have some ego to run to begin with. Okay?
Yeah. True. Yeah.
And you need a lot more. You keep going at it another 11 times. So.
Yeah.
I always tried to hold that under check.
Yeah.
It wasn't about me. It was about the people I represented.
Makes sense. What was your proudest moment as a legislator?
The proudest moment. I think passing some of that organ donor legislation, which I believe made an absolute difference in some people's lives right now, and the Indiana High School Athletic Association review panel are two things that on occasion I see something happen and I think that happened because I helped make it happen.
Yeah. Let's see, what advice would you give to future legislators or even current legislators?
Be humble, do your homework, understand that you can have a difference of opinion without being an enemy or trying to hurt someone else's chances in some crazy way in a campaign, lying. I'm so disappointed that there's no more liability for false campaign literature. I mean, some of the things that was sent out against me, and I'm not just talking about me because it happens to everyone, was just blatant lies. And those hurt, okay? If you got any self-pride at all, it hurts when something comes out that, one of the pieces insinuated I'd voted to protect child molesters.
Yikes.
You got to be kidding. I've got copies of these. You can see one of them had that front cover on that piece had a bloody switchblade knife dangling from an arm. They sent about 10 or 12 of those, and those hurt. They do, because they're totally false, and you just pray to God nobody listens or believes them.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing because, being someone who served in the General Assembly and your experience, dealing with the law on a regular basis, to what extent are people allowed to just, make up stuff about people without, getting in trouble for that?
Well, it seems to be the case.
It seems like, I'm surprised sometimes that there can be no defamation lawsuits or something against.
Yes, and those are things that probably ought to be done or challenged at some point in time but the First Amendment is so strong and we all believe in it. So who's going to be the judge as to, what crosses the line? That's what you get into. Yeah,
it's always a tough topic.
That's why it's important to have been around your district, shaking hands, letting people know who you are, and then when they hear bullshit like that, they go, I know, Dale, that's not true.
Yeah. Well, what, in your opinion, is the most important work of the Indiana General Assembly?
Well, that's kind of open-ended. You mean in regards to passing something?
Well, yeah, when you think of the Indiana General Assembly, what's its main purpose, do you think, when it comes to serving, society?
Well, it should be there to help promote job growth, a decent living wage, protection of the environment, anything to help people in their day-to-day lives. Cost of college education has just gotten, extremely high, and people, if you can find a way to help them do that, make those payments and meet those bills, I think that ought to be, at least three of the goals that they ought to strive for.
Yeah. What would you say the public does not know about the Indiana General Assembly and how it operates?
It's amazing how many times people actually confused me, or a candidate, going to Washington.
Oh, yeah.
So it would be better if we had a little stronger government classes, I think.
Yeah, that's always unfortunate. Yeah.
Or they would bring an issue up that's before the U.S. Congress and think, that was you, and when in fact it was national and not statewide issue.
Yeah. How would you say the state of Indiana has changed over the course of your lifetime?
I think we're holding our own. I mean, we don't have an ocean, we don't have mountains, but we've got some pretty nice places you can go to. Our state parks have dunes. French Lick is something that's happened during my tenure that I kind of helped with on some things. Is a wonderful place to take a short trip down to southern Indiana to see things. I think we're holding our own with the assets we've got. And the thing in the past that's always made me the proudest has been our national legislators, people like Lee Hamilton and Dick Lugar.
Mm-hmm.
My God, if we had 150 of those people, we wouldn't have too many problems.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. How has the Indiana General Assembly changed?
More partisan.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know what else to say except that. That's the tragedy part of it. I don't think everything is as black and white as some of them say. I see things in gray.
Yeah. Do you think the people of Indiana have changed at all?
I think there's been some cases here in the last, 10, 15 years where economic stress has hit people. And the job market is changing, from one type of manufacturing base to technological, and companies like Eli Lilly are right out there on the forefront. So I think it's moved in a direction of, less dependent upon that manufacturing base and more into other areas. That's good. Thank God most people who are born here want to stay here. Yeah, sure, it's nice to visit the mountains and the ocean, but I was always ready to come back home too.
Yeah. Okay. Last question then. What do you want the people of Indiana to know about their influence on the Indiana General Assembly?
You can make a difference, okay? Let me tell you, if I got 10 or 12 phone calls on an issue, I started paying attention to it. Then when the emails started coming in, carte blanche, they can make a difference, okay? And don't be afraid to contact your person and be civil, be reasonable, and that. Don't just call and start screaming at them, because they've got a lot of factors maybe going on on an issue that they don't know about. So be polite, make your voice heard, and sometimes you actually make a dang difference.
Yeah, true. Well, is there anything that I didn't ask about that you want to mention, or?
Well, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I'm very honored that I was given the opportunity to serve the number of years that I did. It was enlightening. I hope that I made a difference in more than one life and did not waste my time or my constituents' time. I want to thank them very much for the opportunity to do what I've done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much then for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Ben. I wish you all the luck in the world, and I hope someday somebody finds use for the words.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, thank you so much.